How to sabotage your flight training experience. Are you interested in sabotaging your flight training experience? Okay, then let me help. Here's how to go about doing it. Before you begin your flight training, demand to fly with as many different instructors at the flight school as you possibly can. That's right. Insist on being bumped from one instructor to the next. And whatever you do, don't just fly with one instructor. Switch instructors every few hours to obtain the, different perspectives they offer on how to fly an airplane. And do not fly with one instructor long enough for him or her to develop an understanding about how you learn. You see, you don't want that knowledge to get out. And if perchance you begin to trust one instructor, then treat this like a prison break. Get out of there. Run, leave, scoot, scat, boogie. Switch instructors immediately because, you never want to trust anyone in aviation. That's how they get you. Most important, if an instructor starts trusting you and begins offering you more cockpit responsibility, then it's time to switch instructors again. You see, it doesn't take a Sherlock homeboy here to get my drift. This is the worst possible advice anyone can give a student pilot. Unfortunately, it's advice similar to what many student pilots hear when they sign up for flight training at some, but by no means all flight schools. And the really sad part is it's also advice that almost guarantees a student's inability to make acceptable progress toward earning a private pilot certificate, assuming he or she even makes any progress at all. For instance, at a local Southern California flight school, one young lady was forced to switch back and forth between 8 different instructors as they became available for training. After 8 months and nearly $15,000 in debt and no solo, she quit flying out of frustration. What a terrible shame it is to ruin someone's ability to experience and enjoy aviation for the rest of her life. So here's the straight skinny about agreeing to fly with multiple instructors. The only time it's beneficial for you to switch instructors is if your present instructor is incompatible, incompetent, incapable, or unwilling to teach you properly. And heavens knows there are instructors like this in aviation, and they should be avoided at all cost. And if you have a bad CFI, a bad flight instructor, then find a better one. If you have a good flight instructor, then elect to train with that person exclusively until earning your pilot certificate. Period. You are the consumer and have every right and personal responsibility to yourself to choose the person with whom you want to train. Believe it or not, some flight schools will try to convince you that it's in your best interest to fly with many different instructors during your primary training. And if you believe this nonsense, then you might also believe that the Bronze Age began with the invention of the tanning bed. It didn't. What these flight schools don't tell you is that the only benefit occurring here goes to the flight school, not to you, the student. With many part-time instructors on staff or a high turnover of CFIs on staff, it's in the school's best interest to keep these instructors busy. And I don't begrudge them for doing this, but I'm not an advocate for these type of schools. I'm an advocate for student pilots. So let's examine some of the methods of persuasion that flight schools use to promote flying with multiple instructors instead of just one good instructor. And the most common reason that flight schools promote flying with many different instructors instead of flying with the best instructor for you is availability. You see, students are told that they'll never have to worry about scheduling a lesson because, there's always at least one instructor with an opening available in his or her schedule. And while that might be true, how does this benefit you? Well, there's really no benefit here because the flight school assumes that all instructors teach equally well. That's very unlikely in my opinion. If you're considering a flight school based solely on the number of available flight instructors, then, your priorities and perhaps your chakras need realignment. Your objective shouldn't be, I just want to fly and I don't care who teaches me. Instead, it should be, I want to train solely with the best instructor for me. Instructor availability at a flight school should be assumed. Otherwise, why would you even consider training at this school? I certainly wouldn't purchase a car based on whatever car is on the dealership's lot that day. I look for a specific car, and the car that's best for me. Then I visit the dealership selling that brand. You see, your objective should be to look for a flight school with the best instructor that fits your needs. Then create a schedule to fly with this person exclusively. And rest assured that any flight school attempting to bump you from one instructor to the next is doing this more for their benefit than yours. When the instructor availability Jedi mind trick fails to persuade you, some flight schools will then unleash their next most popular tool of persuasion. I call this the many perspectives approach. In these instances, flight school managers attempt to convince you that flying with several different instructors provides you with many more perspectives on how to pilot an airplane. Perspectives. Doesn't it sound as if someone is trying to enroll you in an art class here? You see, if you encounter the many perspectives sales pitch, then ask the flight school manager why you need so many perspectives on how to fly an airplane when you don't as yet even have one perspective on the subject. The fact is that when you fly with a good instructor, he or she can teach you to fly at least as well as he or she does, right? Right. So you only need one perspective, your good flight instructor's perspective on learning how to fly, especially since no art class is involved. You see, the many perspectives idea is a guaranteed way to confuse any student during training. Fly with 3 instructors and you get 3 different views on how to fly an airplane. 10 instructors, 10 different views, and so on. Yes, these differences might appear relatively minor to an experienced pilot. However, to a beginner, they represent conflicting and contradicting opinions about flying that turn sense into nonsense. Some flight schools will also tell you that all their flight instructors use the same syllabus for training. Therefore, there are no differences in how students are taught. Well, if you believe that, then you might also believe that the Iron Age was a time when people wore neatly pressed clothing. It wasn't. A syllabus only tells an instructor what to cover and when to cover it. It doesn't tell him or her how to cover a topic, and that's a disposition dependent on the instructor's experience, skill, and knowledge. There's another big, and I do mean big, downside to the many instructors recommendation that, well, some flight schools fail to share with you. Training with many different instructors instead of one good instructor means that no single instructor acquires a contiguous history of your training personality. In other words, no single instructor learns your strengths, weaknesses, skills, capabilities, and learning strategies. Consequently, no single instructor fully learns how you learn. When you switch from one instructor to another instructor every few hours, each instructor needs to verify your skill level to his satisfaction once again before you advance in training. And that means you'll spend unnecessary time reviewing material already learned. Ultimately, training delays increase and additional money is spent inefficiently on training. If you want proof of this, then ask any student who by default ended up losing instructor after instructor due to being hired by an airline. Years ago in Fairbanks, Alaska, I met a student who ended up having, 15 instructors over a 2.5-year period. She finally ended up with a private pilot certificate and spent $35,000 in the process. Perhaps the most important and often unrecognized reason for limiting your flight training to one good instructor is trust. Trust in your instructor. Trust means predictability, which means that you don't need to keep second-guessing your instructor's behavior. Trust implies that you're confident that your instructor will keep you safe and prevent you from being harmed. A lack of trust means that you'll never quite relax in the cockpit, and that is detrimental to learning. The way students learn to trust their instructor, however, is by spending time training with them, one-on-one, and not by switching from one instructor to another. There is simply no substitute for trust when it comes to fortifying and accelerating the flight training process. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that you shouldn't fly with part-time instructors here. I'm saying that if you're going to fly with a part-time instructor because he or she is a real pro, then train with that person exclusively. Yes, It may take more time to earn your pilot certificate. However, if this is the only option you have for training, then it's clearly the best option for you. The fact is that some flight schools endorse the many instructor program not because it's good for you. They do so because it's good for them. Your objective in taking flight lessons is not to keep the flight school in business. It's the flight school's job to stay in business. Your objective is to learn how to fly safely at a reasonable cost, all the while enjoying the process. And whatever you do, don't participate in sabotaging your flight training by letting the flight school bump you from one instructor to another. Find a good instructor and stick with this person.